At this time of year, you have to be ready for anything when it comes to the weather. From rain, snow, or my least favorite, the dreaded wintry mix. But one thing I love about my Rover rain cape is that it fits over whatever I'm wearing. If it's cold and rainy outside and I have a big winter coat on, I just put the Rover on and stay dry, without the need for another bulky layer. So no matter what Mother Nature throws my way, I'm ready. Honestly, if there is one essential piece of gear I like to have with me when I'm out and about, it's my Rover. And because it comes in an array of bright colors, it stands out on those cold, gray winter days. Listeners of the War on Cars can save 15% on everything in the Cleverhood store. So get the best rain gear for cycling and walking at cleverhood.com/waroncars with code Happy New Year. That's cleverhood.com/waroncars, discount code Happy New Year.
This episode was produced with the generous support of the William and Helen Mazer Foundation.
This is The War on Cars. I'm Doug Gordon. In this episode, part 2 of a series on the creation of America's car culture. It's from producer Alana Strauss, who explores the origins and history of the interstate highway system and the devastating effects the nation's highway building program had on 2 neighborhoods, one in New Orleans and the other in Syracuse. Our hope is that after you listen, you'll have a new perspective on how and why U.S. cities were carved up by highways, the lingering effects of such projects, and how, as the great American writer William Faulkner once wrote, the past is never dead, it's not even past. As a reminder, we are on Patreon at patreon.com/thewaroncarspod. We depend on listener support to produce the podcast, so thank you so much for signing up. Don't forget, you can find us on our Life After Cars book tour well into 2026. We have some great events lined up, including shows in Miami with our friends Chris and Melissa Bruntlett, as well as shows in Columbus, Pittsburgh, Toronto, and more. You can buy the book and get tickets to everything at lifeaftercars.com. Now, enjoy the episode.
Amy Stelly is an artist, designer, and urban planner who researches the health, environmental, and social impacts of city infrastructure. A New Orleans native, she lives in the Tremé neighborhood in the same house where she grew up.
My children are the 4th generation to live in this house. I'm the 3rd. Yeah, no, we've been here a long time.
Tremé is one of the oldest neighborhoods in New Orleans and one of the oldest and most historic African-American neighborhoods in the United States. As Stelly remembers, when she was a kid in the 1950s and 60s, the streets of Tremé were beautiful. None more so than Claiborne Avenue, which featured a stunning 100-foot wide median.
It was like a really giant park, a huge parkway because it was wide enough for the boys to play football. One of the most beautiful and broadest boulevards in New Orleans, heavily treed with oak trees.
Claiborne was also lined with theaters and bars where some of the city's top musicians would play, as well as plenty of Black-owned businesses, all of which catered to the local community.
Claiborne at one time in its heyday was really a Black Wall Street. We had all kinds of services, all kinds of professionals, doctors, lawyers, lots of street activity because you only have 2 lanes of traffic on each side. So the traffic moves slowly enough along the boulevard for the businesses to really capture those potential shoppers. So it was the ideal urban design mix in terms of size and scale.
But when Stelly was just 9 years old, all of that changed. In 1966, construction began on a section of the Interstate 10 called the Claiborne Expressway. This massive 6-lane highway spanned more than 18 blocks. building it required removing Claiborne Avenue's beautiful oak trees. And the trees were just the start. Crews demolished over 500 homes and businesses. The expressway cut off Tremé from other neighborhoods. Over time, even many of the people whose homes were spared moved out. A lot of the businesses that avoided the wrecking ball and bulldozer, they eventually shut down. Quality of life decreased, crime went up. The expressway made the space beneath it dark and dirty, turning it into a kind of underworld that most people try to avoid at all costs, if they can. Though this neighborhood once built wealth, after the expressway went up, Tremé experienced decades of economic decline. Today, you can still see the fallout. Nearly 40% of Tremé's residents live below the poverty line. More than 70% of the homes are rentals, and about a third of the homes are vacant.
This neighborhood is not really seen as desirable to raise a family because of the social ills and public health ills that come with living near a highway. And when I would travel to other parts of the city, it was really astounding to me how dismal, my neighborhood was as a result of the highway. And New Orleans is a really pretty city. There's lots of eye candy here. So when there's a big contrasting character, it's very noticeable.
What happened in Tremé wasn't just about Tremé. It was part of a vision that car manufacturers had concocted decades before. In 1939, at the World's Fair in New York, General Motors sponsored a pavilion called Futurama, designed by the American theatrical and industrial designer Norman Bell Geddes. The exhibit presented fairgoers with a vision of their country as it might look in the then-distant future of 1960, when automated expressways would whisk commuters from city to city and every space in between.
For hundreds of miles around, the motorway continues through the mountains. Without tedious travel, the advantages of living in a small town are within easy reach, bringing the people who live there into closer relations with all the world around. Over space, man has begun to win victory. 20 years ago, the population of this city was approximately 1 million persons. It is much larger. Residential, commercial, and industrial areas all have been separated for greater efficiency and greater convenience.
Suburbs had existed in one form or another for millennia. The Romans even had a word for them: suburbium, the districts immediately beyond a city's walls. In the U.S., before the advent of the automobile, streetcar suburbs, which, as the name suggests, were centered around electric streetcars and trolleys, allowed people to spread beyond urban cores. Think of Philadelphia's mainline suburbs, or places like Brookline, just over the border from Boston, and Shaker Heights, right outside of Cleveland. Those are streetcar suburbs. But in the mid-20th century, car manufacturers began dreaming of a new kind of suburb, one where everyone would get around by car and access city centers on Futurama-inspired, traffic-free highways. In other words, pretty much the America we have today, only without the traffic-free part. Many factors influenced America's journey to becoming a car-dependent nation, from automobile manufacturers' pursuit of profits to a general sense that cars were the natural next step on the timeline of technological progress. But there's one that few people think about today when they're stuck in traffic: the fear of nuclear war. In the 1930s, a transportation researcher named Miller McClintock traveled to Germany. McClintock, who had helped found a traffic research center at the University of California, which later moved to Harvard University, was there to attend a conference. According to Tom McClintock, Miller's grandson, as his grandfather toured Germany, he was shocked by what he saw.
He tells a story of stopping along one of the autobahns and actually measuring the depth of the concrete and getting back in the car, very disturbed, and saying, these roads were not built for automobiles. These roads were built for heavy tanks. And my dad says he went back and reported that to the State Department when he returned, that observation.
After World War II, as the Allies occupied part of Germany, the U.S. tapped the same general who led the D-Day invasion to oversee the American-controlled zone, Dwight D. Eisenhower. Just like McClintock, Eisenhower was fascinated by the German Autobahns, especially given his experience back home. In the summer of 1919, as a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army, Eisenhower participated in the first transcontinental military convoy, traveling from Washington, D.C. to San Francisco, a distance of some 3,200 miles. It was on this journey that Eisenhower experienced for himself just how difficult it was for anyone in the country to travel long distances by motor vehicle. Some roads were nearly impassable because of poor maintenance, narrow widths, muddy conditions, and bridges that couldn't carry the weight of heavy military trucks. The 81 vehicles in the convoy experienced a reported 230 incidents, including running off the road, overturning, and even sinking in quicksand. So when Eisenhower took command of the American zone in Germany in 1945, he couldn't help noticing the quality and efficiency of its autobahns.
I think he'd been very much impressed by the network that had been built in Germany, for example.
That's General Lucius Clay, who was the chairman of Eisenhower's Advisory Committee on a National Highway Program. He was interviewed in 1967.
I'm sure that he realized what a very important contribution it had made to the national defense and security of Germany. The Autobahns were very impressive.
Later, as President of the United States, Eisenhower, along with members of Congress, decided that the country needed a highway system of its own, especially as the Cold War between the U.S. and the Soviet Union began, and the threat of nuclear war loomed large. So Eisenhower put forth a proposal for an interstate highway system. Here's Senator Prescott Bush, father of President George H.W. Bush and grandfather of George W. Bush, making the case for Eisenhower's interstate highway plan in 1966.
There had to be more and better highways in case of national defense, in case we had to move large bodies of people, large bodies of troops. The existing system was totally inadequate to deal with it under emergency circumstances.
As part of the proposal, the federal government would chip in 90% of the funding, $24.8 billion, for 41,000 miles of new highways to be built over 13 years. Even though many proponents argued that a standardized network of quality highways would also create economic growth and reduce congestion, some members of Congress balked at the high price. But Eisenhower knew he could overcome such opposition by focusing on the need to defend the U.S. from a potential invasion, evacuate cities, or move military convoys at a rapid clip, far faster than what he experienced as lieutenant colonel in 1919.
So that's why it was called the Interstate and Defense Highway System. The defense angle was a very persuasive part of the argument, you see. Mm-hmm. Very persuasive.
So, in 1956, with overwhelming congressional support, Eisenhower signed the National Interstate and Defense Highway Act into law. With federal money now available to fund one of the biggest public works projects in U.S. history, automakers and real estate developers saw an opening. They had spent decades looking for ways to boost car sales. But as long as American cities stayed dense and transit-heavy, there was only so much driving people would do. But now, a race was on to determine where new highways would be built. And automotive-related special interest groups lobbied city and state governments hard to have their say. While many European cities steered highways around their city centers, these groups pushed for the opposite. They wanted to make it incredibly easy to drive into city centers. So that's exactly what planners did. And the neighborhoods they chose to run those highways through? Well, for people like Stelly and the residents of historically black neighborhoods like Tremé, it was pretty obvious what the decision-making process was.
There is a very distinct and strong correlation between where these highways landed and people of color and poor people. And the goal was to get wealthier suburbanites into downtown, which meant going through. We became the shortcuts. Black voices, really, we had no seat at the table. So we were just buzzard meat.
Stelly and other longtime Tremé residents have a term for the Claiborne Expressway.
We call the highway a monument to racism and, in some cases, probably classism, too. So these things need to be removed.
As the interstate highway system grew throughout the post-war period, some communities fought back, like the residents of the 15th Ward in Syracuse, New York.
The 15th Ward actually has a long history. It was once an area where a lot of the Jewish immigrants went.
That's Richard Levy, Professor Emeritus of Biology at Syracuse University. He's lived in Syracuse since the 1960s.
Then they were at least partially supplanted by African Americans. The houses were, they weren't particularly nice houses, but there were houses, there were shops.
In the 1950s and 60s, a plan was put forth to build Interstate 81 through the 15th Ward. To make room for the new highway, 1,300 families would have to be displaced. Many locals, including Levy, thought demolishing people's homes for the convenience of motorists was unjust. So he decided to see what he could do.
What sort of got you interested in social justice?
Well, there's a couple of things. I'm a Holocaust survivor. I came over here, and I eventually married an African-American woman. So my interest in social justice, I guess, was initially formed by those experiences.
Levy joined the local chapter of the Congress of Racial Equality, or CORE, which was originally formed in Chicago and became a driving force in the use of nonviolent direct action during the Civil Rights era. CORE's Syracuse chapter was headed by Richard Levy's friend, fellow university professor, and civil rights organizer, George Wiley.
George Wiley was a very interesting and quite charismatic man. He was the first African-American hired by the chemistry department here. He was an excellent chemist. Incidentally, his wife was white, so we were both interracial marriages. And so we became friends.
The idea of stopping a highway from destroying a largely black neighborhood and displacing its residents fit right in with the goals of the civil rights movement.
It was not long after Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, and the country was in an uproar, and it was finally coming to Syracuse, too.
Levy remembers the atmosphere in the meetings where Wiley and his fellow activists would discuss their plans to stop the construction of I-81.
George Wiley and the people who worked with him were very good at whipping up emotions in a crowd. We had lots of people that supported us, and those of us who participated in this were on fire. We really thought we were doing something important.
Levy recalls Wiley asking for volunteers to agree to stand in the way of the trucks and other equipment to stop crews from demolishing the homes and businesses of the 15th Ward. When word got out about what the protesters were planning to do, those who worked for the university found themselves at risk of losing their jobs.
The chancellor of the university made a statement that anybody who participated in those demonstrations would have to pay for the consequences. I mean, I just arrived in Syracuse. I had just started my job. I was certainly not tenured. I was a non-tenured faculty member, new to this department. The chairman of my department was not at all sympathetic. But, I didn't even think about that it might be a problem for my career or something. I just did it. But then afterwards I thought about it. I thought, ooh, that was really something.
One morning, Levy went with a group of volunteers to the I-81 construction site.
There would be maybe 15 or 20 of us, and we would march up and down first in front of this equipment. Some of us would climb on the crane, some of us would climb on the trucks or whatever.
It didn't take long before the police were on the scene to arrest the protesters, including Levy.
What was being in jail like?
Not very nice. You have a sort of a slab, you have a hole in the floor that you can pee in, and my wife came a little later and brought me an overcoat because we didn't have any blankets. People were singing during the night.
Do you remember what songs people were singing?
We Shall Overcome is the one that we sang most.
You're very casual about having been arrested, but I feel like that would be kind of scary your first time.
It was.
Still, Levy's fear was tempered by the knowledge that he and his fellow organizers were standing up for justice.
I think the thing that made it not scary is one became part of a community that was on a mission. I think it was very exciting to be part of that and to think that you might be doing something important for an important cause. It was a very small thing in a very large movement, but I think a large movement is made up of lots of little small things.
Eventually, CORE was successful in getting a meeting with the city to express their demands. But in the end, the effort to stop I-81 failed. The 15th Ward was demolished, its residents displaced and scattered.
Syracuse, like most cities at that time, was highly segregated, and it was going to be virtually impossible for the people who lived in the 15th Ward, most of whom were not very affluent, to find housing in the rest of the city. So some new housing was put up. People were relocated, but it was a mess.
Like the residents of the 15th Ward, many communities fought back against highways. Most failed, though in some wealthier places, like Greenwich Village in New York and Cambridge, Massachusetts, highway plans were either stopped or changed thanks to local advocacy. Still, those were the exceptions. Today, the dream of car-dependent suburbs as places of progress and prosperity is, at best, debatable. They certainly aren't the shining monuments envisioned by Norman Bell Geddes, General Motors, or the people who experienced the Futurama exhibit in 1939. The suburbs these highways enabled are expensive to maintain. They're places where people feel isolated, where community life continues to be eroded, and where those who are dependent on cars, which is to say, just about everyone, must deal with an array of health problems, from asthma to diabetes, not to mention the most obvious public health crisis caused by cars, fatalities. It's ironic. This massive public works project that was originally motivated by a desire to keep Americans safe from war has contributed to a death toll that, since the 1950s, now numbers in the millions. But even before embarking on this giant public works project, Eisenhower thought highways were a solution to traffic crashes. Here he is in 1954 talking about the epidemic.
When any particular activity in the United States takes 38,000 American lives in 1 year, it becomes a national problem of the first importance. We have a great organization working effectively and supported by the government to seek ways and means of promoting peace in the world, in order that these great tragedies may be prevented or at least minimized in the future. But we live every day with this problem that costs us so many lives. And not only those lives, but the grief and suffering in the families from which those victims came, to say nothing of the disablement that so many other citizens must bear all through their lives, either through their own or someone else's carelessness.
Today, the communities that were destroyed by highways like the Claiborne Expressway in New Orleans and I-81 in Syracuse are left not merely with blight and crime, but also noise pollution and environmental toxins. Here's Stelly again.
So on any given day, let's say just outside of rush hour, the noise level is at 80 decibels or above, and that's dangerous to your hearing. I live a block and a half away from the elevated deck, and on any given night, I can lie in bed and the decibel meter will read at 50, which is, chatter in an office building, and most people want quiet when it's time to go to bed, not the noise level that's like chatter in an office building.
Stelly worked with a professor at the Louisiana State University School of Public Health who measured lead levels in the soil of playgrounds near the Claiborne Expressway and found that they were dangerously high, much higher than playgrounds located elsewhere in the city.
She looks at me and says, "You've got to change this. It's too much lead. You've got to do something about this."
Stelly says that, most likely, these high lead levels were caused by the highway. She points out that Louisiana State University students have been measuring lead levels in playgrounds around the city and found higher levels of lead in playgrounds adjacent to the highway. Their readings show that playgrounds under multiple spans of the highway have the highest levels of lead. In 2012, totally by chance, Stelly seized an opportunity to get word out about the harmful effects of the highway. That year, the city decided to demolish an old hotel near the expressway. Stelly says the place had been full of crime.
I was cheering, actually, the demise of the building because my cousins had stayed there, and one of my favorite cousins, called me crying hysterically about coming to get her to just take her out of the hotel because she couldn't take all of the shenanigans that were going on.
On the day of the demolition, Stelly went out to watch.
Oh, there it goes.
A local reporter walked up to Stelly, and that was her moment.
The reporter talked to me about my enthusiasm for the demolition, and I pointed to the highway and said, "That's the next big thing that's going to go in New Orleans." And people regard me as crazy, but they did play it on the news.
For nearly 10 years, she and other community organizers attended community meetings. They called their elected officials. They wrote op-eds on the subject. Then, one morning in 2021, Stelly and her husband were sitting on the balcony of their home, in view of the highway, when her phone rang.
And it turned out to be the Washington Post, asking me what I thought about the president calling Claiborne out in his, rollout of the infrastructure bill. And that was the first I heard of it.
The Biden administration was announcing its Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. That bill included a $1 billion Reconnecting Communities grant, allocated to neighborhoods that had been torn apart by highways.
The president recognized what was going on in New Orleans, so for that I'm very grateful.
Ultimately, the Department of Transportation granted the city and state a $500,000 planning grant to upgrade the I-10 overpass and remove some of the on-ramps and off-ramps. But in 2025, the Trump administration eliminated the Reconstructing Communities grant program. The cuts canceled dozens of projects, including a $61 million grant for other pedestrian bridges and safety improvements in New Orleans. Despite the setback, Amy remains determined to get rid of the highway. And she envisions a Claiborne Avenue a lot like the one of her childhood.
I think we can rebuild Claiborne really the way the community wants it to be built, as a Black Wall Street again. We have quite a bit of historic building stock that's left. The bones of the boulevard are still intact. You can see where the median is. So if we could cut down what was plopped down upon us, actually the bones of the street are still there.
That's it for this episode of The War on Cars. Many thanks to producer Alana Strauss for her work on this one. Remember, you can go back and listen to part 1, which we released in November. We'll put a link in the show notes. Thanks also to the Helen and William Mazer Foundation for their generous support that makes episodes like this and everything we do at The War on Cars possible. You can support the podcast on Patreon at patreon.com/thewaroncarspod. We want to give a big thanks to everyone who signed up, including our top supporters, Charlie G. of Human Powered Law in Portland, Oregon, Mark Hedlund, Virginia Baker, and Brandon DeCoster. We also couldn't do it without Cleverhood. Listeners of The War on Cars can save 15% on everything in the Cleverhood store, so get the best rain gear for cycling and walking at cleverhood.com/waroncars and use code Happy New Year at checkout. This episode was produced by Ilana Strauss. Executive producer and supervising story producer was me, Doug Gordon. Our theme music is by Nathaniel Goodyear. Transcripts are by Russell Gregg. Our logo is by Danny Finkel. And on behalf of my co-host, Sarah Goodyear, this is The War on Cars.